The five of them took the keys, got into the garage, and drove away with a luxury car. Roland, who hadn't driven since his driving test during his college days, now found himself at the helm. In the car, the witches who had just survived a fierce battle seemed utterly exhausted. In the back seat, Faldy asked Roland what was the thing they just fought against, and how it managed to suddenly gain so much magical power. Roland, unsure himself, speculated that the creature was maybe made purely of magical energy, yet he was certain that it was not a demon. Ling, still visibly shaken, recounted how the room had been engulfed in red light, freezing her in place as if some terrifying force had its gaze fixed upon her, a feeling far more intense than any high-ranked demon she had encountered. Roland sought to comfort the witches, telling them that such monsters were exceedingly rare, otherwise, the world would have long been overrun. Phyllis didn't join the conversation, simply stared quietly at Roland and the steering wheel. Catching her gaze, Roland smiled and asked if she wanted to learn to drive, which she nodded eagerly. Winking at her, Roland quipped that they'd need to pull off a few more heists to enjoy daily luxuries like tasty foods, bigger mansions, and luxury cars for everyone. This perked up Faldy, especially at the mention of food. Although she had only heard of hamburgers and hot pot from Phyllis, all she had so far was instant noodles. However, she didn't mind it since it was equally delicious. Looking at the tired witches through the rearview mirror, Roland promised them that those were just the basics. Once they had enough money, they would taste the finest cuisines all around the world. The witches, energized by his words, sat up straight, mouth-watering and excited. Faldy said that once everyone was fully healed, they should quickly move on to their next target, which she had already scoped out. Dawn, one of the injured witches, chimed in with enthusiasm, insisting that she was fine and she was ready any time. The atmosphere in the car shifted from fatigue to a burgeoning excitement about their next grand adventure, or rather robbery. Roland never expected it was this simple to boost morale. As the witches continued their discussion about food, he slowly drove into the city. Carefully hiding the car, they then returned to the warehouse. Opening the safe, they found several bundles of cash and some jewelry. Unexpectedly, there were also a few spinning natural forces. Roland pondered whether the Fallen were now using these as a form of currency. Shortly after, Roland returned to his apartment. He tiptoed in only to find the lights still on in the living room. Zero was asleep in the living room, with her books spread out before her. It was obvious that she'd been studying and waiting for him. Seeing Zero drooling in her sleep, something seemed to touch Roland's heart. Though they were just tenant and landlords, he could feel a faint sense of family bonds forming between them. Gently, he picked her up and carried her back to her bed, tucking her in before returning to tidy up her books in the living room. One of the textbooks caught his attention. It was on Olympiad mathematics. It reminded him of his own middle school days when he had taken Olympiad classes. However, he thought the course was impractical. Roland had never been particularly interested in Olympiad mathematics, and had dropped it early on, so naturally, he wouldn't know much about its content. However, when he flipped open the textbook, to his astonishment, it wasn't blank. His breathing quickened with excitement. If you are wondering why Roland was so thrilled, this quick reminder that the dream world is very closely resembling the back on Earth, so the books, materials, and records existed just as they do here, but only containing knowledge that Roland himself knew or previously read. If he was unfamiliar with a topic or had never seen it, the pages would appear blank. In the next scene, we transition to a snowy, icy landscape. None other than the snowy mountains. Inside one of the tents, Lightning sat by a stove, holding a journal. She wrote that this was the 13th day of the expedition. Although it's been 15 days since winter has passed, the snow was still heavy around here. Fortunately, the ship's boiler continued to supply hot water and food. According to their original plan, they used Margie's magical arc ability to locate the ancient ruins, and with the help of the Takara witch who transferred onto a drilling worm to tunnel through the mountains. However, the mission was far more challenging than they expected. The mountain was riddled with caverns, making it difficult to find the actual passage leading to the ruins. Lightning and Maisie contributed to the search, but progress was slow. Nonetheless, Lightning remained undeterred. Much like her father always said, explorers are forever on the journey. Just as Lightning was about to rest after finishing recording her day, Wendy rushed into the tent. She was in a hurry. She tells Lightning that there had been an incident in the cave, and Fran was missing. Startled, Lightning stood up and quickly followed after Wendy. They arrived at the place of the incident. Lightning peered down where Fran allegedly fell into. Nightingale and Edith stood beside her, with Edith explaining that Sylvie had found the right passage, and Fran was working to clear the path, and maybe fall into the pit due to an unexpected cliff. Lightning noted Edith's use of words. She then asked what she meant by maybe. Edith elaborated that Sylvie saw Fran's magical energy suddenly vanish, but when she arrived, she couldn't see anything at the bottom of the pit. This was quite shocking. If Sylvie's abilities couldn't see what's underneath, then this cliff must have been super deep? There are only two explanations, either that the depth exceeded Sylvie's range of observation or that something was interfering with her abilities. Things seemed to get more complicated. At the same time, not far from them, an argument erupted between Agatha and the Takira witches, clearly about whether to go down immediately to rescue Fran. Taking a deep breath, Lightning knew the rescue mission would be very dangerous. The very bottom could be a trap set by enemies or inhabited by some unknown creature like the invisible mantis they saw months ago. She took a deep breath and then made up her mind. As a qualified explorer, she couldn't abandon any comrade. Approaching the arguing group, she tells them that she will be the first to go down and see what's underneath. One of the god punishment witches argued with Agatha, whom Lightning recalled was named Elena. As they chatted, they were worried that there could be something that interrupts a witch's ability. After all, Roland had decreed that no one should act alone and that the search should proceed with the support of the First Army. Lightning then shared her plan, suggesting that they tie a rope around her waist. If her abilities failed, they could pull her back up. As a distinguished explorer, she wouldn't abandon a comrade nor act recklessly. Nightingale, standing beside her, decided to accompany Lightning into the pit. Her ability allowed her to navigate effortlessly through the mist, and cliffs are nothing special to her. This also allows them to quickly retreat if they encounter enemies. Wendy, however, shook her head, as opposed to putting them in danger. She argued that if there were powerful enemies below, it was too dangerous for the two to venture down. Elena, perhaps sensing the witch union's concern, tells everyone that she won't abandon Fran and will go down by herself. Agatha's voice then grew stern as she asked whether 4 centuries had made them forget the importance of obeying orders. Her tone was serious, once again becoming the high-ranking witch from the Takira era. Hearing this, all of the god punishment witches fell silent, and Elena ultimately bowed to Agatha, obeying her orders. After a moment of silence, Edith tells everyone to stop arguing. She reminded them that Roland had instructed that exploration efforts must be coordinated among all parties. All they have to do is to find a way to let the First Army into the pit. Turned out, Edith had found a cliff next to a waterfall. In the next scene, we see Lightning strapped to a rope with a lift platform above her. On the platform were witches, god punishment witches, and 2 heavy machine gun teams. Agatha used her powers to freeze the water, filling in the cracks on the cliff to ensure a smooth descent of the lift basket. Turned out that Edith had come up with the idea to dismantle the ship's steam engine and have the god punishment witches transport it to the snowy mountains. They then boiled snow water to operate the engine, which in turn powered the lift basket, allowing the rescue team to safely into the pit. Elena couldn't help but marvel at the wisdom of mortals. Agatha nodded, telling her that perhaps within everyone here, Edith had the deepest understanding of the king's thoughts. Lightning did some quick math, and found out that this would make them lose 600 gold, but she smiled, knowing that if Roland were here, he would have chosen to rescue a comrade without hesitation. After all, that was just the kind of person Roland was. As they descended further, they all had a sinking feeling. At such a height, an ordinary person would have certainly died. However, Fran uses the drilling worm's body. They didn't know if she would be all right. Suddenly, Lightning halted, shouting that there was something ahead, then sped up her descent and finally reached the bottom. She checked the surroundings but didn't see Fran. Instead, she spotted several black stone towers within what appeared to be a demon's camp. Nightingale also jumped down, saying this might be the tower that the giant worm swallowed months ago. As the lift fully landed, Agatha surveyed the surroundings but still no sign of Fran. The First Army was on alert, lighting up the entire area. They noticed that beside the towers there were gaps on either side. They speculated whether Fran might have rolled down one of these gaps. Agatha knew that these black stone towers were rumored to be made of god punishment stones. However, these towers didn't broadly disrupt magic but could isolate it. Agatha channeled her ability and struck the tower, however, she couldn't even land a scratch. Lightning flew a bit lower, she heard the sound of running water. She speculated that Fran might have fallen down one of the sides due to an underground river, which could also explain why Sylvie hadn't detected Fran. Agatha nodded, agreeing that the stone towers had likely interfered with Sylvie's abilities, obscuring the view of the underground river. She instructed Lightning to fly up and relay the situation to Wendy, to bring more people down and establish a defensive line here. Lightning nodded and swiftly ascended. Soon, the team followed the riverbanks to an underground river. They were instantly captivated by the scene before them: countless fireflies, clear water, various mushrooms, and fruits that could glow they had never seen. Nightingale lamented that if the city of Neverwinter had such glowing fruits, the streets and alleys could be illuminated at night. Lightning was excited about taking some of the fruits and mushrooms back to grow, but she was even more eager to taste them. Agatha turned to Elena, inquiring if the drilling worms could swim, to which Elena shook her head, she didn't quite know either. The group could only proceed by following the flow of the river. Nightingale, observing the direction of the water, estimated that this underground river might lead to the southern hills. Lightning was puzzled, she had been to that area many times but recalled there weren't any rivers there. Where could all this water be ending up? Suddenly, there was a rustle ahead. Everyone drew their weapons. Nightingale used her abilities but detected no magical energy ahead. They advanced a few steps and discovered something looking like an egg. Elena gestured to the god punishment witches to move forward for a closer look. However, the thing looked disturbingly grotesque, causing Lightning to wonder about the size of the creature that could lay such an egg. Just as they were examining it, one of the god punishment witches sensed danger and plunged her sword into the egg. With a swift upward flick, the egg split open, spraying out some sort of fluid. To their astonishment, a demon emerged from inside. Then the entire egg shifted, transforming into a creature that began to climb onto the stone wall and escape. Nightingale quickly caught up with it, pulling out her dagger and stabbing it fiercely in the head. The group realized in horror that perhaps the demons were being spawned from these eggs. Agatha stared in shock at the demon's corpse, having never heard anything about this. From the look, it appeared that the demon was fully matured. As the group ventured further, they stumbled upon more eggs, however, each time finding different things inside. One of them even contained a human. This grim discovery made it clear that these eggs were using both demons and humans as prey. But how did these eggs capture them, and could it be that they had infiltrated the territory of Neverwinter? This question weighed heavily on everyone's mind. Suddenly, Nightingale sensed a magical reaction up ahead. Realizing it must be Fran, she quickly sprinted ahead, with the rest of the group quickly following. As Nightingale neared, it became increasingly difficult to see clearly. Just seconds later, multiple gunshots rang out. The group quickened their steps, and Lightning, drawing her pistol, flew towards Nightingale's location. Fortunately, Nightingale was unharmed. She then activated a magic stone for light and was standing over several dead demonic beasts. It's none other than the invisible mantis. Nightingale confidently tucked her pistol back into her belt, boasting that nothing could escape her eyes. She then patted Fran, who was tightly bound beside her. Fran wriggled and mumbled, her mouth apparently sealed. As Lightning checked the surroundings, she noticed a stone monument. Nightingale joined her, and it became apparent they had finally found the Snow Mountain ruins. The group caught up, and Nightingale explained what had happened. Fran had been captured by demonic beasts, and this was part of the ruins. However, the enemy might still be nearby. Together, they tore away the thing entrapping Fran. After rescuing Fran, the next step was to establish a defensive line by the First Army before proceeding further. When Fran is finally able to talk, everyone hears her warning to not look up. However, after hearing this, Lightning instinctively looked upwards. Above, in the dark cavern ceiling, a crimson eye appeared, followed by a second, a third, and then countless others. Countless eyes lit up the entire cavern, their eerie gaze fixed on lightning, causing the hairs on her back to stand on end. Meanwhile, above ground, Edith and Brian were still directing the First Army to establish defenses when Edith thought she heard something. Brian, however, heard nothing and assumed Edith was just a bit anxious, suggesting she take a rest. Edith smiled and shook her head. Seeing her smile, Brian, face slightly blushed and quickly changed the subject, asking where she thought the machine gun should be positioned. Edith pointed to a higher ground and said that gave them more strategic advantage. Suddenly, Edith noticed something strange. The grass on the ground seemed to be moving as they were being stepped on. Before she could turn to warn the soldiers, a swift swishing sound was followed by a gruesome sight. A soldier's head rolled off his shoulders, his smile still frozen on his face. Just a second ago he was having a good time with his friend, and now he's dead. Enemy attack! Edith finally shouted, and then yelled, "The enemy is invisible!" Almost immediately, several more soldiers were gruesomely beheaded. Realizing there was more than one, Edith threw a dagger in the direction of the fallen soldiers to gauge the attacker's position. The dagger was deflected. She then drew her sword and thrust it where she calculated was the attacker's position, felt that she had pierced something. She had aimed for what she figured was the enemy's abdomen. As she prepared to retreat, sensing imminent danger, she instinctively ducked, feeling something barely missed the back of her head, cutting off several strands of her hair in the process. Edith quickly fell back, realizing the enemy was likely armed with at least 2 weapons. She urgently called to the First Army soldiers to fire in her direction. The soldiers quickly turned around and a barrage of bullets soared where Edith was, revealing the form of a huge mantis as it was torn apart by gunfire. The demonic beast soon collapsed dead, but there were still several more of them nearby, continuing to inflict casualties among the First Army soldiers. Suddenly, several figures charged forward, slashing at the invisible mantis. Suddenly a burst of light flashed, revealing the creature's position briefly, and more god punishment witches appeared, swiftly charging at the remaining beasts. Edith breathed in relief as one of the god punishment witches extended a hand, asking if she was all right. The witch lamented that they were still too late. The witch advised Edith to retreat with the First Army and leave the demonic beasts to them. Edith asked how they were able to see the invisible enemies. It turned out that the god punishment stones could temporarily disrupt the enemy's invisibility. The witch explained that the effectiveness of the stones depends on factors like light, distance, and attention. Most stones only had a radius of maybe 2 meters or less, and these creatures are incredibly fast. It's very difficult to detect in such dim conditions. Edith noted that the speed, strength, and attack range of these demonic beasts were terrifying, too much for any normal human to react to in time. Brian, looking around at the fallen soldiers, cursed himself for not having barbed wire deployed sooner. The god punishment witches urged everyone to retreat quickly, as the previous noise had alarmed the entire snowy mountain. It was then that Edith realized the sounds she had heard were not hallucinations. The god punishment witch was surprised Edith had heard them too, considering that they had lost their sense of touch and taste, and their sight and hearing had become extremely better. It was unexpected that a mortal could also hear these sounds. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Edith hurriedly directed the First Army soldiers to ascend in order, with the god punishment witches remaining on guard. Margie then used her ability to transport everyone upwards, but just as they were moving, they suddenly heard intense gunfire. The faces of the group turned grim as they quickened their pace. As the group emerged from the cave, they were immediately greeted by soldiers frantically reloading their weapons, reporting that a swarm of demonic beasts was descending from the snowy mountain. Everyone looked up, as countless of them charging down. Edith suspected that the earlier sound might have been a call to summon these beasts. She recalled reading a book written by Roland about a peculiar type of sound in this world. Although humans can't hear them, they were crystal clear to certain creatures, which could even use it for unique communication within their species. It seemed they were now witnessing such a phenomenon. A soldier approached, reporting that Maisie had observed unusual demonic beast activity in the forest. Perhaps they were also coming toward the snowy mountain. Brian stood frozen, sweat beading on his forehead. Edith thought Brian was still too inexperienced. A commander should never show confusion or helplessness, especially in front of their subordinates. Acting quickly, Edith instructed Brian to rally the First Army stationed outside the mountain, gathering everyone at the cave entrance to form a defense line. At the same time, deploy all heavy machine guns. She then directed Maisie to fly back to Neverwinter and immediately to contact King Roland for reinforcements. They had enough supplies and ammunition for now, but they couldn't last very long. Given that the demonic beasts wasn't able to swim, Edith ordered them to not abandon their cement ships which moored outside. However, leave about 10 people on the ship to hold the demonic beasts at bay with the ships. Lastly, she ordered everyone to bury god punishment stones nearby to prevent any invisible mantis from ambushing them. Moreover, they had to continue sending the god punishment witches down to reinforce those already below. Gathering everyone together to locate the exploration team was crucial, and they needed to act swiftly. Edith suspected that the mysterious sound they heard was key to everything. Brian took a deep breath and quickly began executing Edith's orders. Meanwhile, underground, Agatha suddenly became nauseous, and what just happened was awful. Turned out, the group had entered the body of Fran, and Agatha described it as feeling like being stuffed into a sack full of stinky slime and then violently thrown against a wall multiple times. Nightingale, emerging from the haze, agreed that Agatha's description was painfully accurate. But had it not been for Fran leading them out, they would have been in grave danger. Fran cautiously asked if she had been too rough, only to make Agatha nauseous again with her breath. Lightning confirmed that being swallowed by a giant worm and emerging unscathed was an unprecedented experience. Elena rolled her eyes, telling everyone that she was jealous of them being able to smell the stench and feel the stickiness.
Hold up, wait a minute, something ain't right.
Anyway, Agatha coughed twice and managed to smile, choosing not to linger on the topic. Instead, she redirected the group's focus to what they needed to do next. The recent ordeal had left the witches feeling uneasy, haunted by the memory of countless crimson eyes above them and the deafening sound that had unleashed a swarm of hybrid demonic beasts rushing from the depths of the ruins toward them. Earlier, in that critical moment, Fran made the correct decision. She swallowed everyone except Nightingale into her stomach and turned to burrow into the cave wall. As her entire body was engulfed by the rock, the demonic beasts caught up and began viciously biting her body. Even with Nightingale providing cover, the number of enemies was overwhelming. Enduring intense pain, Fran continued to drill the cave for over 10 meters before forcefully rolling her massive body to crush the pursuing beasts. She then thrashed her tail against the cave ceiling, causing the rock above to collapse and seal the entrance, finally escaping. Fortunately, everyone emerged unscathed. Now that they had a moment to breathe, they finally had time to ask Fran what exactly had happened. Fran explained that the moment she had broken through the passage, the rock layer beneath her suddenly collapsed. She fell before she could react. She hit the bottom of the pit and then lost consciousness. When she woke up, she was being carried away by several invisible things and was quickly bound up. Luckily, she wasn't eaten right away.